Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. The village of Oak Haven had always nestled itself at the base of that hill, like a loyal dog to a silent, ancient master. I, Amelia, lived in a modest stone cottage on the town's edge, the timber groaning under the weather's assault, the scent of aged paper and leather glue permeating the air of my small studio. My hands, skilled in restoring forgotten tomes, found peace in the rhythm of simple life, punctuated only by the cricket's song and the soft rustle of wind through the pines. Stormy nights were rare here, but when they came, the world became a somber palette of grays and blues, and the hill seemed to loom even larger, an imposing silhouette against the sky sliced by lightning. On that particular night, the fine rain began to drum rhythmically on the slate roof, a familiar lullaby that usually lulled me into a deep, dreamless sleep. I was finishing the binding of an old nautical chart, my spectacles perched on the tip of my nose as the last fold set with precision. The cool air, drawn in through the slightly ajar window, carried the sweet aroma of damp earth and the metallic tang of electricity in the air. Suddenly, a distant thunderclap rattled my teeth, and for an instant, the night's silence, once comforting, was filled with something more subtle. It was almost imperceptible at first, a sound that danced on the periphery of my hearing, as faint as a fleeting thought. I initially dismissed it as the wail of the wind, or perhaps the reverberation of the heavy rain against the hill's rocky face. But as the storm gathered strength and the thunder rumbled closer, I could discern a different tonality. It wasn't the wind's lament, nor the creak of the house timbers. It was something more organic, a low, constant murmuring, almost as if the very stones of the hill were breathing. I closed my eyes, trying to focus, but the sound seemed to dissipate whenever I tried to grasp it, like a dream slipping through one's fingers. I resolved to ignore it, attributing it to the nights, fatigue and the power of suggestion. I turned my attention back to the map, smoothing the last page with the palm of my hand, the aged parchment seeming to vibrate slightly beneath my touch. However, the murmuring returned, this time a little more defined, a thread of sound weaving, with the crackle of the fireplace and the hiss of the rain. It was a sound that seemed to emanate from within the hill itself, something that did not belong to the outside world, and the sensation of not being alone in my cottage, even though I was, sent a shiver down my spine. Sleep would not come so easily tonight, I knew. The whispers, once almost imperceptible, began to shape themselves into something more concrete, albeit still incomprehensible. It was a cacophony of overlapping, indistinct voices, like a distant chorus of ghosts or echoes of forgotten conversations. I rose, my bare feet feeling the coldness of the old wooden floorboards, and moved closer to the window. The darkness outside was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional flashes of lightning that painted the massive silhouette of the hill in fleeting shades of purple and blue. The sound seemed to come directly from it, a silent and unsettling invitation that tugged me from my comfortable seclusion, a summons I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. The wind, a companion that had always felt familiar and comforting, now seemed to carry a foreign breath, cold and unsettling against my skin. I stood by the window for what felt like an eternity, listening intently, trying to decipher the disjointed symphony of voices. They were not words in any language I knew, yet they possessed a peculiar cadence, a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. My scientific mind, usually so adept at finding logical explanations, struggled against the unsettling truth of what I was hearing. This was no trick of the wind, no auditory hallucination. This was something real, emanating from the ancient core of the hill. A flash of lightning illuminated the darkness outside, briefly revealing the gnarled trees that clawed at the hill's slopes, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the stormy sky. For a split second, I imagined I saw movement among them, a fleeting shadow. But then the darkness swallowed it whole again. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the eerie silence between the thunderclaps. Was it just my overactive imagination, fueled by the unsettling whispers? Or was there truly something else out there, lurking in the shadows, drawn by the same enigmatic sounds that had pierced my serene night? I retreated from the window, the chill of the glass clinging to my fingertips, and paced my small living room, the floorboards groaning in protest beneath my restless steps. The flickering light from the dying embers in the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls, transforming familiar objects into grotesque figures. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind against the windows, now sounded sinister, amplified by the persistent murmuring from the hill. My sanctuary, my quiet haven of books and solitude, suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed to an unseen threat that pressed in from the dark. A sudden, sharp rap at my door sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me, momentarily eclipsing the whispers. It was an unexpected sound, jarring and unwelcome in the quiet of the night. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my eyes wide and darting towards the heavy oak door. Who could possibly be calling at this hour in such a downpour? My mind raced, conjuring images of lost travelers or a neighbor in distress, but a colder, more primal fear suggested something far more sinister, something connected to the unsettling, voices that still echoed in my ears. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, the wood cold beneath my hesitant touch. The rapping came again, softer this time, almost tentative, followed by a muffled groan that seemed to rise from the very depths of the storm. The whispers from the hill seemed to intensify, weaving themselves into the sound of the knocking, a discordant chorus that filled my small cottage. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple, despite the cold. This wasn't just a storm. Not anymore. This was something else entirely, something reaching out, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever lay beyond my door was intrinsically linked to the growing mystery of the hill. Against my better judgment, a cold dread creeping through my veins, I reached for the peephole, my eye pressed close against the tiny lens. The view was distorted, a blurry kaleidoscope of dark rain and swaying branches, but I could make out a silhouette. It was a man, hunched against the storm, his form indistinct in the gloom. He seemed to be clutching something, though I couldn't quite discern what it was, and his posture suggested a weariness that belied the persistence of his knocking. The faint groaning sound persisted, a low, guttural murmur that seemed to emanate from him, or perhaps from the very ground beneath his feet. My hand trembled as I slowly, almost imperceptibly, unlatched the heavy bolt. A sliver of cold, damp air snaked into the warmth of my home, bringing with it the potent smell of wet earth and something else, something metallic, like old coins or dried blood. The man shifted his weight, and for a moment, his face was visible through the crack. In the door, illuminated by a fleeting flash of lightning, his eyes, though shadowed by the brim of a wide-brimmed hat, held an unsettling intensity, a mixture of desperation and something ancient, something that seemed to have seen too many storms. He was a stranger, undeniably, Yet there was a bizarre sense of familiarity about him, as if he were a character from a forgotten dream. His features were sharp, his skin weathered, and a thin scar ran down his cheek, disappearing into his beard. He didn't speak, not with words, but the faint groaning grew a little louder, almost a plea, and I realized it wasn't just him. It was a chorus, faint but undeniably present, echoing the whispers from the hill. It felt like the boundaries between my safe haven and the ominous world outside were rapidly dissolving. "Can I help you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper, strained and hoarse. The man didn't respond, his gaze fixed on some point beyond me, as if he were peering into the very soul of my cottage. The strange low groan emanating from him pulsed with an almost rhythmic quality. A deep hum that resonated not in my ears, but directly within my chest, chilling me to the bone. It was then I noticed his hands, gnarled and powerful, clutching a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and brittle with age, looking as though it had been pulled from the grave. He slowly extended the book towards me, his movement deliberate, almost ritualistic. The rain dripped from its worn cover onto my polished floorboards, leaving dark, spreading stains. The whispers from the hill, which had momentarily subsided during the man's presence, now returned with renewed vigor, weaving around his silent offering, almost guiding my hand. It was an old ledger, the kind used for documenting forgotten transactions, or family trees, but there was an odd symbol etched into its cover, a spiral, seemingly made of interwoven roots that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. I felt an undeniable pull, a curiosity battling with profound fear, as I reached out to take it. As my fingers brushed against the leather-bound book, a jolt, not of electricity, but of something cold and ancient shot through me. The man's grip was surprisingly strong, yet he didn't resist as I took the tome. His eyes, now clearer in the dim light, seemed to pierce through me, a silent message passing between us that transcended words. The whispers from the hill, no longer a distant murmur, coalesced into a chilling hum, a chorus of unintelligible sounds that vibrated in my very bones, seeming to urge me to accept the gift, or warning me against it. The air in my cottage grew heavy, charged with an unknown energy. He withdrew his hand slowly, almost regretfully, and then, without a single word or a backward glance, turned and disappeared into the relentless downpour. I watched his silhouette fade into the swirling darkness, a phantom vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. The heavy oak door swung shut with a soft thud, a sound that seemed to seal me inside with the inexplicable mystery he had left behind. My heart continued its frantic beat, but now it was less from fear and more from a profound sense of bewilderment, a realization that my peaceful existence had just been irrevocably altered by a silent stranger and an ancient book. I leaned against the closed door, the leather-bound ledger clutched tightly in my hand, its weight surprisingly substantial. The whispers from the hill were still present, a low, persistent hum, but they felt different now, more focused, almost as if they were emanating from the book itself. I brought the book closer, its musty scent of old paper and dust filling my nostrils. The intricate spiral on its cover, reminiscent of twisted roots, seemed to pulse with a faint internal light, drawing my gaze, compelling me to unravel its secrets despite the ominous presence it brought into my home. With trembling fingers, I carried the book to my workshop table, where the lamplight cast a warm, inviting glow. The moment I laid it down, the room seemed to grow colder, and the air crackled with an unseen tension. The faint hum from the hill outside seemed to intensify, weaving itself into the very fabric of my thoughts, a constant, eerie presence. I took a deep, shaky breath, my gaze fixed on the ancient ledger. It was clear now. This was not just an old book. It was a key, a conduit to the very source of the unsettling whispers. And I knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that my quiet life in Oakhaven would never be the same. My fingers, usually so steady, hovered over the aged cover, hesitating for a moment. What secrets lay within these brittle pages, and what would happen once I opened them? The storm outside raged on, a fitting soundtrack to the burgeoning mystery that had just walked through my door. The hill, once a benevolent guardian, now felt like a watchful, ancient entity, its whispers beckoning me deeper into its enigmatic embrace. As a final, deep rumble of thunder shook the cottage, I made my decision, and with a slow, deliberate motion, I unfastened the tarnished clasp, preparing to unveil the first true horror that the whispers of the hill had to offer. The chill that emanated from the ancient ledger was not merely the coldness of old paper, but a deeper, more pervasive cold that seeped into my bones. As the tarnished clasp sprang open with a faint click, a wave of dust, thick and pungent, rose from its pages, carrying with it a scent that was vaguely familiar, yet unsettling, like damp earth mingled with something metallic, something that spoke of decay and forgotten time. The initial pages were blank, a stark white canvas of aged parchment, as if guarding the true contents of the tome, a deliberate silence before the storm of what lay within. My fingers, now surprisingly steady despite the lingering unease, turned the first few blank pages, the dry paper rustling softly like autumn leaves. Then, abruptly, the entries began, meticulously handwritten in a flowing, old-fashioned script. The ink faded to sepia tones. It was a journal, not a ledger, chronicling what appeared to be weather observations, detailed descriptions of storm patterns and lunar phases, all meticulously recorded by a hand that was clearly accustomed to precision. The entries dated back, nearly 2 centuries, painting a vivid, albeit disquieting, picture of Oakhaven's past. But it wasn't the detailed weather reports that made my breath catch in my throat. Interspersed among the meteorological data were cryptic annotations, small, strange symbols etched into the margins, and odd, almost poetic phrases that spoke of the hill's breath and the whispers in the rain. There were also drawings, rough but unsettlingly accurate, of the spiral symbol that adorned the book's cover, repeated again and again, as if a morbid obsession had driven the hand that drew them. These were not the musings of a rational mind. They were the desperate confessions of someone deeply affected by the hill. As I continued to read, a name began to appear frequently in the entries: Elias Thorne. The village founder, I recalled vaguely from local history lessons, a figure of myth and legend in Oakhaven. His tone in the journal entries grew progressively more frantic, the meticulous observations giving way to increasingly desperate pleas, and fragmented accounts of voices from the earth. He spoke of feeling drawn to the hill during storms, of secrets buried deep, and a presence that hungers. The scientific entries became a mere facade, a desperate attempt to rationalize the encroaching madness. The storm outside intensified, as if mirroring the growing tension within the journal's pages. Rain lashed against the window panes, and the wind howled like a mournful spirit, creating a chilling symphony that seemed to underscore Elias Thorne's descent into obsession. I noticed, with a growing sense of dread, that as the journal progressed, The strange symbols became more elaborate, more frequent, almost consuming the meticulous weather charts. It was as if Elias had been attempting to map not just the storms in the sky, but the storms within the hill, and the terrifying, incessant whispers that accompanied them. My eyes scanned the lines, tracing Elias's desperate pleas, and I felt a chilling resonance with his words, a strange connection across centuries. He wrote of the voice that calls to me, a singular potent sound amidst the cacophony of whispers. It wasn't merely noise, it was an intelligence, an ancient sentience that seemed to be communicating with him. He detailed how the voice would grow clearer with each passing storm, urging him towards specific locations on the hill, revealing glimpses of a forgotten past, and promising something profound, yet terrifying, in return for his unwavering attention and dedication. A sudden sharp crack from the fireplace made me jump, nearly dropping the heavy journal. A log, too large for the grate, had finally split, sending a shower of sparks dancing into the room. I quickly pushed it back with the poker, my heart still racing from the sudden noise. It was a mundane occurrence, a simple domestic mishap. Yet in the charged atmosphere of that night, it felt like a deliberate interruption, a subtle warning against delving too deeply into Elias Thorne's secrets. The air around me seemed to grow colder, despite the roaring fire, and the scent of damp earth and old metal intensified around the book. Elias's final entries were disturbing, filled with manic scrawls and disjointed sentences. He described a feeling of being chosen, of understanding the hill's true nature, and of an impending convergence that would shatter the boundaries between worlds. The last coherent entry spoke of a deep hollow, a place where the whispers find their home. And the final pages were smeared with what looked like dried mud and a faint, rusty stain, the ink illegible beneath the grime, as if the writer had been interrupted mid-sentence by an unseen force. As I absorbed the chilling conclusion of Elias's journal, a new sound began to permeate the cottage, distinct from the distant whispers of the hill. It was a faint scratching, a persistent rhythmic rasp that seemed to come from directly beneath my floorboards. My breath hitched in my throat. It was too regular to be an animal, too deliberate to be the settling of the house. It sounded like something, or someone, was deliberately dragging something rough, perhaps stone or heavy timber, across the earth below my very feet, moving slowly, but with undeniable purpose. I froze, the journal still open in my hands, my gaze fixed on the floor, as if I could pierce the sturdy wooden planks with sheer will. The scratching continued, a slow, methodical scrape, each pass echoing in the sudden, profound silence of the cottage, now that the distant whispers from the hill seemed to momentarily recede, replaced by this closer, more immediate threat. It was a sound that conjured images of something ancient and heavy being disturbed, something that had lain dormant for centuries, and was now, inexplicably, stirring directly beneath my sanctuary, drawn perhaps by the very book I held. My gaze remained fixed on the floorboards, an illogical hope that the sound would simply cease, but it continued its relentless scraping, growing subtly louder, more defined. It wasn't merely scratching now. There was a faint dragging quality to it, like a heavy weight being slowly pulled across rough stone. The air in the room grew heavy, a pressure building that made my ears pop, and the scent of damp earth and old metal intensified to an almost overwhelming degree, filling my lungs with its ancient, acrid breath. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of my resolve. I wanted to run, to flee my own cottage, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, trapped by the bizarre phenomenon unfolding beneath me. The journal of Elias Thorne lay open on the table, its final, frantic entries seeming to vibrate with a newfound energy, as if the very words were coming to life, manifesting the unsettling reality he had documented centuries ago. The hill's distant whispers, which had previously seemed to recede, now subtly returned. A faint hum beneath the scraping, a chilling accompaniment. Suddenly, a section of the wooden floorboards, directly beneath where the scraping seemed strongest, bowed inward with a soft creak. It wasn't a drastic movement, just a subtle dip, but it was enough to send a fresh wave of terror through me. Whatever was down there, whatever was making that dreadful sound, was not merely below the foundation. It was exerting a tangible pressure, a force that threatened the very structural integrity of my home. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, mirroring the turmoil within my small world. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of old books that clattered loudly to the floor. The sound, normally jarring, was barely a whisper against the now more pronounced scraping. The low groan I had heard from the man at my door earlier now seemed to echo from beneath the floor, a deeper, more resonant vibration that shook the very foundations of the cottage. It was a sound that spoke of immense effort, of something striving to break free, something that had been contained, but was now awakening with a terrifying, primal hunger. My mind raced, desperately trying to find a logical explanation. But all reason had abandoned me. This wasn't a gas leak, or rodents, or any mundane occurrence. This was something supernatural, something connected to the ancient secrets of Oakhaven, to Elias Thorne, and to the ominous presence on the hill. The scraping shifted, moving slightly to the right, then back, as if whatever was below was searching, testing the weakest points of my floor, its intentions undeniably malevolent. The whispers from the hill outside coalesced, no longer distant, but a distinct, unsettling chorus that filled the air. The scratching intensified, accompanied by a faint groaning sound that vibrated through the floorboards, a guttural hum that seemed to resonate directly in my chest. It felt less like an external threat and more like something ancient, buried deep within the earth, now reaching out. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and something acrid, almost burnt, filling my lungs with its oppressive presence. My scientific curiosity, which had always driven me, was now utterly overshadowed by a primal terror, a cold dread that clung to my skin. I stumbled back further, my hand sweeping across the mantelpiece, knocking a delicate porcelain figurine to the floor where it shattered with a sickening crunch. The sound was swallowed almost immediately by the relentless scraping and groaning from beneath, as if the very house was protesting the awakening of something terrible. The flickering lamplight seemed to dim, casting longer, more menacing shadows that danced across the walls, transforming familiar shapes into grotesque, fleeting figures of horror, mirroring the escalating tension. Driven by an instinct I didn't understand, I grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, its cold weight surprisingly comforting in my trembling hand. It was a futile gesture, I knew, against whatever monstrous entity lay beneath the floorboards, but it was all I had. The scratching converged on one spot, a single insistent point beneath the worn rug, and the floorboards there began to visibly bulge, straining against the unseen pressure, as if on the verge of splintering. The groaning erupted into a low, guttural roar, muffled by the earth and wood, but undeniably powerful, shaking the very foundations of my small cottage. The air vibrated, and the whispers from the hill outside, which had been a constant undercurrent, now surged into a deafening chorus, a chaotic symphony of voices that seemed to scream in unison, a terrifying crescendo mirroring the impending breach. It was a sound that pierced through my ears, directly into my very mind, causing a searing pain behind my eyes. Suddenly, with a violent splintering crash, the floorboards beneath the rug gave way. A gaping maw of darkness opened into the earth below, releasing a blast of frigid ancient air that smelled overwhelmingly of decay and damp stone. From the depths of the newly formed chasm, a single elongated skeletal hand, pale and ancient, slowly emerged, its bony fingers reaching blindly into the lamplight, beckoning, accompanied by an echoing, triumphant whisper that seemed to emanate directly from the hill itself. The skeletal hand, ancient and bone-white, twitched as it extended from the splintered floorboards, its long, bony fingers seeming to grasp at the very air. A wave of indescribable revulsion mixed with a morbid fascination washed over me, rendering me utterly immobile. The roiling darkness within the newly formed chasm below pulsed faintly, as if something immense stirred in its depths, its presence palpable even in the suffocating silence that had fallen upon the cottage. The furious whispers from the hill outside had momentarily abated, replaced by a singular, focused hum emanating directly from the maw. My grip on the iron poker tightened, my knuckles white, but it felt like a child's toy against the ancient, horror now manifesting itself in my living room. The scent of decay, metallic and cloying, intensified, making my stomach churn. I could feel the cold radiating from the open chasm, a chill that was far deeper than the stormy night, seeping into my very core, threatening to freeze my blood. It was a cold that spoke of long slumber, of something long forgotten, and now violently awakened by my unwitting intrusion into its domain. Just as the hand seemed to flex, as if preparing to pull itself fully from the abyss, a sudden, blinding flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening clap of thunder that shook the cottage to its very foundations. The force of the blast sent a tremor through the floor, and the hand, as if recoiling from the sudden light, withdrew rapidly into the darkness below, disappearing with a sickening thump that echoed in the sudden, eerie silence. My breath hitched, a gasp escaping my lips, as the chasm remained a gaping, empty void. I stood there, panting, the poker still clutched in my hand, staring at the raw, jagged hole in my living room floor. Splintered wood surrounded the edge, and the scent of damp earth and something indefinable, something truly other, permeated the air. The whispers from the hill outside, which had been silenced by the brief manifestation, slowly began to return, a cautious murmur at first, then gradually building back into their familiar, unsettling chorus, now seeming to observe me, waiting. My mind, still reeling from the shock, desperately sought a rational explanation, anything to anchor me to the world I knew. Was it a hallucination, brought on by sleep deprivation and the eerie journal entries? The broken floorboards and the lingering scent of decay argued otherwise. I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that the events of the night were real, and that the whispers of the hill were far more than mere sounds. They were a prelude, a manifestation of something ancient and malevolent beneath Oakhaven. My immediate thought was to seal the hole, to somehow erase what I had seen, but a deeper, more profound terror suggested it was already too late. The sheer terror of the encounter had left me shaken to my core, but as the initial shock subsided, a familiar drive, that of a scholar confronted with an ancient puzzle, began to reassert itself. I needed answers, not just for my own sanity, but to understand the true nature of what was stirring beneath Oakhaven. My immediate thought was to return to Elias Thorne's journal, to reread his final entries, to see if he had left any clues about the chasm, about the hand, about the malevolent presence he had so desperately chronicled. The storm outside seemed to subside slightly, a momentary lull, as if holding its breath. I carefully approached the workshop table, avoiding the jagged hole in the floor as much as possible. The journal lay open, exactly where I had left it, illuminated by the lamp. The intricate spiral on its cover seemed to pulse with a faint internal light, almost beckoning me closer, its ancient energy drawing me into its orbit. I picked it up, my hands still trembling, and began to flip through the last frantic pages, searching for any detail, any word that might shed light on the terrifying events that had just unfolded in my quiet home. Elias's final words, scrawled in a barely legible hand, spoke of the passage, the gate, and the guardian. He seemed to have been attempting to seal something, to contain a force that threatened to break free. There were crude drawings of stone pillars, resembling ancient dolmens, and a map, rough but discernible, of a path leading deeper into the hill's interior, culminating in a circular clearing. It was clear he was obsessed with preventing something, a culmination of the whispers, a terrifying opening that he believed would consume Oakhaven. My mind raced, connecting the fragments. The man at my door, the mysterious journal, Elias Thorne's desperate warnings, and now the undeniable manifestation from beneath my floorboards. It all pointed to one thing. The hill was not merely whispering, it was awakening, and Elias Thorne had tried to stop it. I suddenly felt a profound sense of urgency, a chilling realization that whatever he had contained was now attempting to free itself, and I, unwittingly, had become involved in an ancient battle, a silent war for the soul of Oakhaven. Determined to understand more, I knew I couldn't stay isolated in my cottage. I needed to consult other resources to find out more about Elias Thorne, his family, and any local legends concerning the hill that might explain these increasingly terrifying occurrences. The town's small, dusty library, often overlooked, would be my first stop. Perhaps within its forgotten archives, among its brittle pages and faded maps, I could find the missing pieces to this horrifying puzzle, before the whispers consumed everything, and the guardian Elias spoke of fully broke free from its ancient prison. The storm had begun to recede as dawn approached, leaving Oakhaven shrouded in a thick, damp fog that clung to every tree and building. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine, and a profound silence had fallen, broken only by the distant drip of water from the eaves. The whispers from the hill, which had been so insistent throughout the night, had faded to a barely perceptible hum, a faint echo that seemed to linger in the periphery of my hearing, a constant reminder of the night's horrors. I dressed quickly, my movements stiff from the lingering shock, and left the cottage, carefully stepping around the splintered hole in the floor. The chill of the early morning air was a welcome contrast to the oppressive atmosphere within my home. The town, usually stirring with the first light, felt eerily quiet, as if Oakhaven itself held its breath, sensing the subtle shift in the ancient presence on the hill. Every shadow seemed deeper, every rustle of leaves a potential warning. The Oakhaven Public Library was a small, unassuming building, tucked away behind the general store. Its shelves held more dust than books, mostly forgotten local histories and dog-eared novels. Mrs. Gable, the librarian, a woman whose eyes held the weary wisdom of generations spent in this quiet town, looked up from her knitting as I entered, her gaze sharper than usual. She was a repository of local gossip and obscure facts, an unofficial historian of Oakhaven's peculiar past. "Amelia, dear, you're out early," she observed, her voice a soft murmur like the turning pages of an old book, and looking a little pale, if I might say. Another sleepless night with those old tomes, I suppose. Her words were gentle, but there was an underlying current of knowing in her tone, as if she could sense the tremor of fear that still ran through me, a subtle awareness of the unseen tensions that permeated Oakhaven. I forced a weak smile. Something like that, Mrs. Gable. Actually, I was hoping you could help me. I'm researching Elias Thorne, the town founder. Specifically, I'm interested in any local legends or old records about him, or about the hill. Her eyes, which had been warm moments before, now flickered with a sudden, unreadable caution. A subtle shift that sent a fresh chill down my spine. The faint whispers from the hill seemed to intensify, a silent warning against my inquiry. Mrs. Gable's smile faded, replaced by a subtle tension around her eyes. She put her knitting down, her gaze now fixed intently on mine. The hill, you say, and Elias Thorne. Her voice was lower now, a mere whisper, as if the very mention of the names carried a forbidden weight. There are stories, Amelia. Old stories. Things people don't talk about openly anymore, especially not with newcomers. Elias Thorne was a complicated man. Driven, some would say. Obsessed, others implied. The faint, persistent whispers from the hill seemed to prickle the edges of my hearing, emphasizing her words. She rose slowly from her chair, her movements stiff, and walked to a locked, glass-fronted cabinet in the corner of the library. It was filled with what looked like dusty, leather-bound volumes, some clearly very old. Local lore has it that Thorne believed the hill was more than just earth and stone, she continued, her back to me as she fumbled with a small, tarnished key. He spoke of it having a heart, a voice. He spent his last years mapping its hidden places, convinced it held a power that could either bless or curse Oakhaven, depending on how it was appeased. The key turned with a rusty creak, and she pulled out a single, ancient-looking book, its spine cracked, pages brittle. It was a local history compiled by one of Oakhaven's earliest ministers, filled with genealogical records and quaint anecdotes. "This book," Mrs. Gable said, turning to face me, her eyes clouded with an unspoken warning, "mentions the Thorne family curse. They say a powerful, dark influence consumed Elias Thorne, driving him to madness, all because he dared to listen too closely to the hill's secrets. Many believe he vanished into the hill itself during a great storm, never to be seen again." She opened the book to a marked page, her finger tracing a faded paragraph. "And there's this, a footnote." Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "It speaks of a ritual performed by Thorne to bind the hungry earth. A failed ritual, they say. It hints at a family graveyard on the hill, where the Thorne lineage lies, but also a deeper, older burial ground that should never be disturbed." Her gaze met mine, a profound sadness and fear in her eyes. "Some believed Elias tried to awaken something that prefers to stay asleep." As she handed me the book, its cold weight surprisingly similar to Elias Thorne's journal, a sudden, piercing wail echoed from somewhere outside, slicing through the morning fog. It was a guttural, inhuman sound, filled with raw agony, unlike anything I had ever heard. Mrs. Gable and I both froze, our eyes wide with shock and shared terror. The sound came from the direction of the old Thorne family property, a place long, abandoned on the lower slopes of the hill, a place where a new, horrifying mystery seemed to have just unfurled itself, inextricably linked to the whispers of the hill. guttural wail, raw and full of an unimaginable agony, hung in the cold morning air, reverberating from the direction of the old Thorne property. Mrs. Gable and I stood frozen in the library, our faces pale, the unspoken fear in our eyes mirroring each other's dread. It wasn't the sound of an animal, not truly. It possessed a depth, a human quality twisted into something monstrous, something that spoke of deep, profound suffering. It was a sound that pierced the very fabric of Oakhaven's quiet facade, confirming that the horrors of my cottage were not isolated incidents. "What was that?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice hoarse, barely audible. Mrs. Gable, her eyes still wide with shock, slowly shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin, grim line. I don't know, Amelia. Not exactly. But it sounds like a soul being torn apart. Something from the old stories, perhaps. Something that the hill doesn't want unearthed. She clutched the old minister's history book to her chest, as if for protection, her gaze fixed on the front door, as if expecting something to burst through it. The wail faded, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the persistent, soft whispers from the hill, which now seemed to hum with a new, unsettling energy, almost a predatory anticipation. The fog outside had begun to thicken further, obscuring the view, making the world outside the library's windows seem like a shifting, ephemeral dreamscape. The air grew colder, and the scent of damp earth and decay intensified, creeping in through the closed windows, a tangible manifestation of the unseen forces at play. My instincts screamed at me to run, to lock myself back in my cottage and pretend none of this was happening, but the rational part of my mind, the part that craved knowledge and understanding, pushed back. The sound had come from the Thorne property, the very place connected to Elias and his chilling journal entries. This was a direct link, an undeniable piece of the puzzle I had unwittingly become embroiled in. I had to investigate, no matter how terrifying the prospect. "I need to go there," I stated, the words surprising even myself with their sudden conviction. Mrs. Gable gasped, her eyes wide with alarm. "Amelia, no. You can't. That place has been abandoned for decades. It's dangerous, cursed even. Whatever that sound was, it's not something you want to find." Her voice was a desperate plea, but my resolve had hardened. The hill was calling, and its whispers had found a new, more horrifying voice, drawing me irrevocably closer to its dark heart. Despite Mrs. Gable's urgent warnings, I felt an undeniable pull, a magnetic force drawing me towards the Thorne property. It wasn't just morbid curiosity. It was a deeper, almost primal compulsion, as if the hill itself was calling to me, its whispers now demanding my presence. I nodded grimly at Mrs. Gable, a silent apology for my stubbornness, and turned to leave the library, the old history book clutched tightly in my hand. The weight of it felt significant, a tangible link to the mysteries I was about to confront. As I stepped out, the fog seemed to embrace me, a cold, damp shroud that muffled all sounds, making the world feel distant and unreal. The whispers from the hill, however, cut through the silence, no longer a mere hum, but a distinct, fragmented babble of voices swirling around me, almost guiding my steps. I could discern individual words now, fleeting and indistinct, like echoes from a distant past, phrases that seemed to dance just beyond my comprehension, intensifying with each step I took towards the old Thorne estate. The path to the Thorne property was overgrown, swallowed by years of neglect. Twisted vines snaked across the cracked flagstones, and ancient skeletal trees clawed at the perpetually overcast sky. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, a faint metallic tang, like old blood, that seemed to cling to the very leaves. The whispers from the hill intensified here, becoming a low, resonant drone that seemed to vibrate in the very ground beneath my feet, a pervasive hum that filled my head. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the swirling fog ahead, a dark, indistinct shape moving slowly towards me. My heart leaped into my throat, a primal fear seizing me, and I froze, half hidden by the encroaching mist. It was an old man, his back hunched, his movements slow and deliberate. He wore a tattered, heavy coat and carried a gnarled walking stick, its tip tapping rhythmically on the hidden path. His face, shadowed by the brim of an old, worn hat, was obscured by the fog, but I could feel his gaze, an unsettling prickle on the back of my neck. He was the same man from my doorstep, the one who had given me Elias Thorne's journal. Recognition, cold and sharp, washed over me. He stopped a few yards away, his head slightly cocked, as if listening intently to the whispers that surrounded us. He didn't speak, but his eyes, ancient and knowing, seemed to pierce through the fog, meeting mine with an unnerving intensity. In his gnarled hand, he held a small, weathered stone, its surface etched with the familiar spiral symbol that adorned the journal's cover, now seeming to pulse with a faint, internal light. The old man, the enigmatic stranger, stood motionless, his eyes dark and ancient, seeming to bore into my very soul. He didn't offer a greeting or a warning, simply a silent, profound understanding that transcended words. The small spiral etched stone in his hand pulsed faintly, a subtle, almost imperceptible glow in the thick fog, as if resonating with the whispers that swirled around us. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, and something acrid, almost metallic, a palpable manifestation of the hill's unsettling presence. He raised his gnarled hand, slowly, deliberately, offering me the stone. It was smooth to the touch, cool, and surprisingly heavy. As my fingers closed around it, a jolt, not of electricity, but of ancient energy, pulsed through me, a chilling sensation that seemed to connect me directly to the hill, to Elias Thorne, and to the terrifying events of the night. The whispers around us intensified, coalescing into a distinct, low hum that seemed to vibrate in my very bones, a chorus of unintelligible voices that felt both inviting and profoundly menacing. "It holds the echo," the old man finally rasped, his voice a dry, gravelly sound, like stones shifting in a forgotten riverbed. His words were few, but they carried a weight, an unspoken history that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The echo of their sorrow and their hunger. His gaze lingered on me, a profound sadness in his eyes, as if he knew the path I was now set upon, a path from which there would be no easy return. The whispers from the hill seemed to swell, as if acknowledging his statement. He then pointed his walking stick towards a barely visible path leading deeper into the fog-shrouded woods, towards the higher slopes of the hill, the old Thorne burial ground. There, the truth begins. His words were a command, an undeniable directive that seemed to bypass my rational mind and resonate directly with the deepest part of my being, the part that had been drawn to the whispers from the very beginning. The scent of decay thickened around us, a clear sign of the ancient place he indicated. Before I could ask another question, before I could process the implications of his cryptic words. The old man turned and melted back into the swirling fog, disappearing as silently and mysteriously as he had appeared at my doorstep. I stood alone, the spiral-etched stone warm in my hand, the chilling echoes of his words, and the insistent whispers from the hill urging me forward. The path he had indicated, barely visible, seemed to beckon me into the unknown depths of the hill, into a confrontation with the ancient secrets that lay buried within its heart. The air around me thickened, growing colder, carrying with it a distinct scent of decaying vegetation and damp earth, a scent that hinted at disturbed ground and ancient secrets. The whispers from the hill, no longer a distant murmur, became a fragmented chorus of low guttural sounds, intertwined with a faint, sorrowful moaning that seemed to rise from the very soil beneath my feet. It was a sound that spoke of grief, of something lost and restless, echoing the torment Elias Thorne had documented in his final desperate entries. As I began to follow the barely discernible path the old man had indicated, the fog around me seemed to shift and swirl, parting just enough to reveal glimpses of weathered, moss-covered stones ahead. These were the markers of the old Thorne family graveyard, a place long forgotten by most of Oakhaven, a chilling testament to the town's hidden history. The knowledge from the minister's book, now clutched tightly in my other hand, confirmed my chilling suspicions. I was stepping into a place where the living and the dead, and something far older, intertwined. The silence that settled upon the graveyard was profound, broken only by the soft drip of water from the ancient trees and the persistent low hum of the hill's whispers. The air here was heavy, thick with a palpable sense of sorrow and an inexplicable dread. The headstones, many of them toppled or half swallowed by the encroaching earth, bore names that stretched back through generations of Thorne, a lineage now seemingly intertwined with the sinister entity stirring beneath the hill. Then, through the shifting veil of fog, I saw it. A newly dug grave, its edges raw and freshly disturbed, unlike the weathered plots surrounding it. A small, crude wooden cross marked the head, and beside it, half buried in the freshly turned earth, lay a tattered piece of fabric, a strip of coarse, dark wool. It was the same fabric as the old man's coat, the silent messenger who had delivered the journal and the warning. My blood ran cold, a horrifying realization dawning upon me. A faint, chilling whisper, clearer than any I had heard before, brushed against my ear, a single, distinct word that seemed to rise from the newly disturbed earth. Thorne. It was a voice, ancient and resonant, speaking directly to me, confirming the terrifying connection between the family, the hill, and the man who had just vanished. As a new, mournful wail echoed from deeper within the hill, a sound that chilled me to the bone. I knew with a horrifying certainty that the grave before me was not merely a symbol, but a direct consequence of the hill's awakening, and I was now standing at the very precipice of its ancient hunger. The wail, rising from deeper within the hill, was a mournful lament, a sound of profound grief that seemed to echo the very essence of the newly dug grave before me. My eyes were fixed on the tattered piece of fabric, the dark wool from the old man's coat, half buried in the freshly turned earth. It was a macabre confirmation, a terrifying link between the silent messenger and the ancient secrets Elias Thorne had tried to bury. The whispers from the hill, a constant companion now, seemed to coil around me, their low hum shifting, almost tightening, with each beat of my frantic heart. The scent of decay, sharp and metallic, permeated the air, thick and cloying around. The grave, a palpable manifestation of something unnatural beneath the soil. I knelt, slowly, cautiously, my fingers brushing against the cold, damp wool. It was unmistakably from the man who had brought me the journal, the one who had vanished into the fog. Was this his final resting place? A consequence of his attempts to warn me? Or was it a ritualistic offering? A grim message left by the hill itself? The questions swirled in my mind, each more terrifying than the last. As my fingers closed around the fabric, a sudden, sharp coldness, far more intense than the morning air, shot through my hand, causing me to recoil. It wasn't the chill of a winter morning. It was the coldness of death, of ancient earth disturbed, of something that had long been dormant now violently awakened. The whispers from the hill surged, no longer a chorus of indistinct voices, but a singular guttural whisper that seemed to speak directly into my mind, a wordless communication that filled my head with a profound sense of foreboding. I scrambled back, away from the grave, the spiral-etched stone still clutched tightly in my other hand, its surface now feeling strangely warm against my palm. The fog seemed to press in closer, obscuring the familiar landmarks of the graveyard, making the world around me feel disorienting and hostile. The mourner's wail from deeper within the hill continued, a chilling counterpoint to the intensified whispers, suggesting a profound tragedy was unfolding, or perhaps had already occurred out of sight. My gaze fell upon one of the older, more weathered headstones near the newly dug grave. Its inscription, barely legible beneath centuries of moss and grime, bore the name Elias Thorne. My blood ran cold. Elias Thorne was mentioned in Elias's journal, a figure he referred to as the first listener, a direct ancestor. And now, the whispers from the hill seemed to call her name, intertwined with a new, insistent word: return. It was a command, not a plea, a chilling directive that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the ancient hill. The chilling whisper of return, directed at Elias Thorne, resonated in my mind, a direct command from the hill itself. It was as if the ancient entity was calling upon its first listener, or perhaps, recognizing my presence, was attempting to use me as a conduit, a new vessel for its will. The spiral stone in my hand grew warmer, a low hum now emanating from its surface, a subtle vibration that matched the pulse of the whispers from the hill, intensifying the unnerving connection. I stood in the desolate graveyard, surrounded by forgotten headstones and the heavy shroud of fog, the wail from deeper within the hill still a faint sorrowful echo. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Elias Thorne's descent into madness, his desperate attempts to contain the entity, the old man's silent warning, and now, the direct, terrifying command from the hill. It was all converging, pulling, me deeper into Oakhaven's hidden, sinister history. As I pondered my next move, a sudden, sharp crack echoed from the nearby woods, a sound of breaking branches, too deliberate to be accidental. It was close, far closer than the distant wail, and it sent a fresh wave of primal fear through me. I instinctively ducked behind a large, crumbling mausoleum, my heart pounding against my ribs, struggling to regulate my breathing. The whispers from the hill seemed to heighten, a frantic warning chorus in my ears. Through a narrow gap in the fog, I saw it. A shadow, impossibly tall and gaunt, moving silently through the dense undergrowth. It was too indistinct to make out details, but its movements were fluid, predatory, unlike any animal I knew. It seemed to glide rather than walk, its form wavering in the swirling mist, an elusive presence that appeared to be searching, its unseen gaze sweeping the ancient burial ground with unsettling intensity. The air grew frigid, and the scent of decay strengthened significantly. The shadow moved with a disturbing grace, weaving between the ancient trees and toppled headstones, heading directly towards the newly dug grave. It stopped there, motionless, a silent sentinel in the fog. The whispers from the hill pulsed violently, a wave of incoherent sounds that seemed to emanate directly from the shadowy figure, a chilling confirmation that this was no mere stranger. This was the entity, or a manifestation of it, now present, and undeniably drawn to the disturbed earth and the essence of the Thorne lineage. The shadowy figure, a silent sentinel by the freshly dug grave, remained utterly still, its form indistinct, yet undeniably menacing in the swirling fog. The air around it crackled with an unseen energy, and the scent of decay intensified to an almost unbearable degree, a putrid aroma that caught in my throat. The whispers from the hill, now a frantic, urgent babble, seemed to emanate directly from the figure, a terrifying symphony of ancient voices that filled my mind, overwhelming my senses. I pressed myself further against the cold, damp stone of the mausoleum, hardly daring to breathe, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to remain hidden, to avoid drawing the attention of this spectral presence. It was a manifestation of the hill's hunger, I realized, a form conjured from the depths of its ancient malevolence, now awakened and searching, perhaps for the first listener Elias Thorne had spoken of. Suddenly, the shadow shifted. It didn't move with the graceful glide it had exhibited before, but rather with a sudden, jerky movement, like something adjusting to a newly awakened form. It turned its head slowly, its form blurring in the mist, and I felt its unseen gaze sweep directly over my hiding spot. A jolt of pure, icy terror shot through me, a profound certainty that it knew I was there, that its search had ended. A low, guttural moan escaped the shadowy figure, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very earth, shaking the ancient headstones around me. It was a sound of immense power, of ancient sorrow, but also of a terrible, undeniable hunger. The whispers from the hill pulsed violently, a wave of incoherent sounds that crashed against my mind, making my head throb with an intense, burning pain behind my eyes. The figure then began to move, slowly, deliberately, away from the grave, and directly towards the mausoleum where I was hidden. Each step was accompanied by a faint, wet, dragging sound, as if something heavy and viscous was being pulled across the damp earth. The scent of decay intensified, now mixed with a chilling, metallic odor. There was no doubt. It was coming for me, drawn by a connection I didn't yet fully understand, a connection that rooted me deeply to the ancient secrets of the hill. The rhythmic, wet, dragging sound grew louder, closer, each scrape against the damp earth sending a fresh wave of dread through my body. The shadowy figure, still indistinct in the thick fog, seemed to absorb the dim light, becoming an even deeper void against the pale, swirling mist. The whispers from the hill were now a chaotic symphony, a cacophony of overlapping voices that screamed in my mind, a terrifying premonition of the terror that was about to unfold, their intensity making my head throb with agonizing pain. I held my breath, my muscles tensed, preparing for whatever unspeakable horror would emerge from the fog. The air around the mausoleum grew so cold that I could see my own breath, like fragile clouds in the frigid air. The scent of decay, mixed with that chilling metallic tang, was so potent now that it made my eyes water and my stomach churn, a sickening aroma that spoke of something ancient and unholy finally breaking free from its confines, eager to claim its new territory. Then, directly in front of the mausoleum's entrance, the shadowy figure stopped, It was no longer a vague shape. Its form began to coalesce, the fog seemingly parting to reveal a gaunt, impossibly tall entity. Its limbs were elongated, disproportionate, and its head was a vague, dark mass without discernible features. Yet I felt its gaze, a burning, unseen pressure that seared through my very soul, a chilling, primal awareness of its malevolent focus upon me. A sound, not a whisper, but a deep, resonant thrum emanated from the figure, vibrating through the ground and up into my feet. It was a sound of immense power, of ancient hunger, and with it, the individual whispers from the hill seemed to coalesce into a singular, clear voice in my mind. It was a female voice, ancient and sorrowful, yet undeniably commanding, speaking. A single chilling word. Mine. The force of it almost knocked me backward, rendering me momentarily stunned. With a horrifyingly slow motion, the gaunt, shadowy arm of the entity began to extend towards me, its long, skeletal fingers reaching out, impossibly stretching through the fog. The whisper of mine echoed again in my head, now accompanied by a frantic, rhythmic tapping sound, like bone on stone, coming from just beyond the mausoleum. It was a clear, direct threat, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the entity was claiming me, intending to drag me back into the ancient, hungry heart of the hill. The ancient voice, resonant and cold, echoed the chilling word mine in my head, accompanied by the frantic bone-on-stone tapping that pulsed from just beyond the mausoleum. The shadowy entity, its elongated arm still reaching towards me, seemed to grow larger, its form solidifying further within the dense fog. A profound primal fear seized me, a terrifying realization that its gaze, though unseen, was fixed upon me, and its intent was undeniably to claim me, to drag me into the cold, ancient depths from which it had emerged. My mind, usually so analytical, was now a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. This was no nightmare, no hallucination. The splintered floorboards in my cottage, the newly dug grave, the minister's history book, and now this monstrous manifestation in the heart of Oak Haven's oldest graveyard, all were terrifyingly real. The scent of decay and damp earth, now overpowering, choked me, a tangible reminder of the sinister presence that had finally revealed itself, eager to claim its new prey. With a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline, I broke free from my paralyzed state. My legs, though trembling, propelled me backwards, away from the reaching limb of the shadow. I stumbled over a fallen headstone, my knee scraping painfully against the rough granite. But the searing pain was a mere flicker against the overwhelming terror that spurred me onward. The whispers from the hill, a chaotic, guttural roar now, seemed to mock my flight, their sound a symphony of ancient predatory glee. I didn't know where I was running, only that I had to escape the grasping shadow. The fog, once a shield, now became a disorienting maze, transforming familiar trees and grave markers into shifting, spectral forms. The rhythmic tapping, like bone on stone, pursued me from beyond the mausoleum, growing louder, closer, an insistent, chilling drumbeat that kept pace with my frantic heart. The voice in my head, still echoing, mine, felt like a cold, tangible weight pressing down on my skull. Then, just as the fear threatened to consume me entirely, a strange, almost comforting presence emanated from the spiral-etched stone in my hand. It pulsed with a faint, warm glow, a subtle vibration that seemed to cut through the oppressive fear and the chaotic whispers. It was a guide, an inexplicable beacon in the disorienting fog, pulling me not away from the hill, but deeper, into its winding, overgrown paths, away from the immediate threat of the shadowy entity, but towards its ancient, enigmatic heart. The tapping, like bone on stone, continued to echo behind me, a chilling reminder of the pursuing entity. But the warm pulse from the spiral stone in my hand became my anchor, guiding me through the swirling, disorienting fog. I found myself instinctively following a faint, almost invisible deer trail that wound its way up the hill's lower slopes, the damp earth soft beneath my worn boots. The air here was thick with the scent of pine and something else, a faint, sweet aroma, like decaying flowers, oddly contrasting with the underlying metallic tang of the graveyard. The path grew steeper, and the old-growth trees pressed in closer, their gnarled branches draped with hanging moss, forming a natural archway that seemed to swallow the last vestiges of morning light. The whispers from the hill, no longer a chaotic cacophony, began to coalesce into distinct, fragmented phrases in my mind, individual words breaking through the static, a chilling symphony of encouragement and foreboding. They seemed to speak of a gathering, a truth, and a waiting deep within the hill's ancient heart. Suddenly, the path opened into a small, unexpected clearing. In its center stood a single, ancient stone pillar, almost entirely consumed by moss and ivy, its surface rough and cold to the touch. It was one of the dolmens Elias Thorne had sketched in his journal, a relic of a forgotten past, marking a specific point on his ominous map. The spiral stone in my hand pulsed violently, its warmth intensifying, a clear indication that I was on the right, albeit terrifying, track. As I approached the pillar, the whispers from the hill surged, swirling around me like an invisible current, pressing in from all sides. They were louder here, more insistent, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I could discern a woman's voice, distinct from the myriad of others, whispering my name, a soft, ethereal sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was a voice that seemed filled with both ancient sorrow and a strange, compelling urgency, drawing me deeper into the hill's embrace. Just as I reached out to touch the ancient stone, a rustle in the dense undergrowth to my right startled me. My head snapped around, my heart leaping into my throat. Through the shifting fog, I caught a glimpse of a figure, cloaked in dark, heavy fabric, retreating rapidly into the deeper woods. It was too fleeting to make out details, but the size and posture suggested it was not the gaunt, shadowy entity from the graveyard. This was someone else, an observer perhaps, or another participant in the hill's ancient game, a new, unsettling element in the unfolding mystery. The fleeting glimpse of the cloaked figure sent a fresh wave of unease through me, a chilling realization that I was not alone in this ancient game. Was it a protector, a guide, or another agent of the hill's malevolent will? The question gnawed at me, adding another layer of complexity to the already overwhelming mystery. The whispers from the hill, however, seemed to urge me onward, a chorus of voices now subtly shifting, almost guiding my thoughts away from the mysterious figure and back towards the ancient pillar before me. I approached the moss-covered pillar, my hand still clutching the spiral-etched stone, which pulsed with a steady, warm glow. The air around the dolmen hummed with an unseen energy, and the scent of damp earth and decaying flowers was particularly strong here, almost intoxicating. As my fingers brushed against the rough, cold stone of the pillar, a surge of raw, ancient power seemed to flow into me, a chilling sensation that momentarily made my head spin, a deep connection to the hill itself, a series of ancient symbols barely visible beneath centuries of moss and grime, became apparent on the pillar's surface. They were different from the spiral, more complex, resembling a forgotten script. As my gaze traced their intricate patterns, a flash of insight, sharp and clear, burst into my mind. These were not just symbols, but a sequence, a set of instructions. They seemed to point further up the hill, towards a specific direction, guiding me deeper into its enigmatic heart. A silent command from the stone itself. The whispers from the hill, which had been a chaotic murmur, now coalesced into a rhythmic chant, a low guttural humming that seemed to vibrate in the very core of the ancient pillar, synchronizing with the pulse of the spiral stone in my hand. It was a language beyond human comprehension, yet I felt a primal understanding, an undeniable urge to follow the direction indicated by the symbols, to continue my ascent into the unknown, drawn by an invisible ancient force. I turned away from the pillar, my eyes now fixed on the faint trail that wound upward, deeper into the dense, fog-shrouded woods. The air grew colder with every step, and the silence, broken only by the rhythmic chant of the whispers, seemed to press in from all sides. The trees here were older, their forms more twisted and ancient, their branches interlocking above me, forming a natural canopy that blocked out the last vestiges of the pale morning light, creating a perpetual twilight that felt both sacred and profoundly ominous. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and a faint, sweet aroma, almost intoxicating, that seemed to emanate from the very roots of the ancient trees. The whispers from the hill, a rhythmic chant now, pulsed around me, filling my mind. No longer a random cacophony, but a deliberate symphony of guidance, drawing me deeper and deeper into the hill's heart. A path that felt both ancient and eerily familiar, as if I had walked it before in some forgotten dream. As I pressed onward, the incline became steeper, the ground uneven and riddled with exposed roots that snaked like grasping fingers across my path. The silence, broken only by the persistent chant of the whispers, seemed to press in from all sides, creating a profound sense of isolation. Every shadow seemed deeper, every rustle of leaves a potential hidden presence, and the temperature dropped, sharply, chilling me to the bone, despite my rapid exertion. Suddenly, a distinct, high-pitched ringing sound pierced through the whispers, a sharp, metallic note that seemed to vibrate in my very skull. It was not a natural sound of the forest, but something artificial, a clear, unmistakable bell-like tone that resonated with an unsettling precision. It came from somewhere just ahead, barely visible through the dense undergrowth. A new, unexpected element in the hill's ancient mystery, momentarily eclipsing the persistent whispers. The ringing sound pulsed again, closer this time. A steady, rhythmic chime that seemed to beckon me forward, promising either revelation or ruin. The spiral stone in my hand grew intensely warm, almost hot, its glow brightening significantly, illuminating the faint trail ahead. It was clear now that this was not merely a guide, but a key, responding to a hidden mechanism, an ancient lock that was only now revealing itself within the depths of the hill, beckoning me closer. As I pushed through a final thicket of thorny bushes, the path opened into a small, circular clearing, shrouded in a perpetual twilight. In its center stood a single, weathered stone well, its ancient rim covered in moss and curious carvings. The ringing sound emanated from its depths, a clear, insistent summons. The whispers from the hill surged, reaching a crescendo, and within the dark mouth of the well, a faint, almost ethereal glow began to pulse, hinting at a truth far more profound and terrifying than I could have ever imagined. A final, undeniable invitation to the hill's deepest secret. The ancient stone well stood in the clearing, its dark mouth humming with the rhythmic, bell-like chime that now resonated deeply within my bones. From its depths, a faint, ethereal glow pulsed, a soft, inviting light that seemed to cut through the perpetual twilight of the clearing. The air around the well was thick with the combined sense of damp earth, decaying flowers, and that chilling metallic tang, a potent aroma that hinted at the profound age and power contained within this hidden place. My gaze was fixed on the well's moss-covered rim, tracing the intricate weathered carvings that adorned its surface. They were not merely decorative. They were a complex series of symbols, a forgotten language that seemed to pulse in synchronization with the glow from the well. Elias Thorne's journal, still clutched in my hand, felt like a vital key, a link to understanding these ancient markings, a guide to deciphering the mysteries of this deeply concealed part of the hill. The whispers from the hill, which had guided me here, now coalesced into a single resonant hum, a deep vibration that seemed to emanate directly from the well itself. It was a sound of immense age, of patient waiting, and as I leaned closer, a profound sense of understanding, almost an ancestral memory, washed over me. This was the deep hollow Elias had spoken of, the place where the whispers find their home, the true heart of Oak Haven's ancient secret. As the ethereal glow from the well intensified, a new element emerged from its depths, a faint, swirling mist, luminescent and cool, that slowly began to rise, coiling itself around the ancient stone. It carried with it an undeniable chill, a cold that seeped into my very core. Yet it was not the cold of fear, but of something infinitely old and powerful, a living breath from the primordial depths of the earth, beckoning me closer, compelling me to witness its revelation. Driven by an irresistible compulsion, I found myself extending a trembling hand towards the well's glowing mist. The spiral-etched stone, still clutched in my other hand, pulsed fiercely, its warmth radiating through my palm, a protective amulet and a powerful conduit all at once. As my fingertips brushed the ethereal mist, a kaleidoscope of fragmented images, ancient and unsettling, flashed through my mind, glimpses of forgotten rituals, shadowy figures, and a colossal presence too vast to comprehend, stirring deep within the earth. The images, fleeting and horrifying, assaulted my mind like shards of broken glass. A shadowy figure, impossibly tall, its features blurred by an unseen force, standing before a circle of chanting individuals. Then, a glimpse of a pulsing raw chasm opening in the earth, and a collective scream of terror and agony echoing through a primeval darkness. The scent of ozone and something akin to burnt flesh filled my nostrils, a sickening aroma accompanying the terrifying visions, a primal memory that was not my own. My hand recoiled from the mist as if burned, the connection severed, and the visions vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving a searing pain behind my eyes. I stumbled backward, clutching my head, the intensity of the experience threatening to overwhelm me. The whispers from the hill, which had been a resonant hum, now erupted into a cacophony of overlapping voices, a chorus of confusion and anger, as if disturbed by my momentary glimpse into their ancient memories. The ethereal mist continued to rise from the well, swirling higher, forming a translucent, shifting column of light in the center of the clearing. Within its luminescent depths, shapes began to form, vague but discernible figures that seemed to writhe and contort, like souls trapped in an eternal torment. They were the sorrow the old man had spoken of, the echoes of those who had been consumed by the hill's hunger, now made visible, their ghostly forms reaching out, a silent plea for release. A low, guttural moan, filled with profound despair, emanated from the mist column, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of my being. It was the same mournful wail I had heard earlier from the Thorne property, now undeniably clear, amplified by the proximity to its source. It was the collective anguish of the lost, their voices merging with the pervasive whispers of the hill, creating a chilling symphony of torment and longing. As the column of mist pulsed with intensified light, a singular, dominant figure began to emerge from its swirling depths. It was a woman, ancient and regal, yet her form was fractured, shifting, made of pure light and shadow. Her eyes, though featureless, held an immense sorrow and an undeniable power, and her lips, though unmoving, seemed to articulate the very essence of the whispers. This was Elara Thorne, the first listener, or what remained of her, a spectral guardian, eternally bound to the well and the hill, her form coalescing from the very essence of the whispers. Elara Thorne's spectral form, composed of swirling, light and shadow, solidified further within the luminous mist. Her ancient eyes, though featureless, fixed upon me with an intense, unwavering gaze. A deep sorrow emanated from her, a profound grief that seemed to cling to the very air. But beneath it, a current of immense power surged, a silent, commanding presence that filled the clearing. The air around us crackled with an unseen energy, and the scent of decay and damp earth intensified, almost suffocating me. Her ethereal lips, though unmoving, seemed to articulate the very essence of the whispers from the hill, which now resonated in my mind as a singular coherent voice. It was Elara's voice, ancient and resonant, yet filled with a chilling clarity. "You have heard the call, Amelia," she whispered, her words echoing not in my ears, but directly within my thoughts, a telepathic communion that transcended sound. The hill hungers, as it always has, and now it stirs. She gestured towards her translucent hand sweeping across its moss-covered rim, and the carvings on its surface seemed to glow with a faint internal light. "This is the source," she continued, her voice filled with a profound weariness. "The heart of its power. A prison and a conduit. For centuries, it has fed on the echoes of those who strayed too close, on the fear, on the despair. Elias, in his misguided piety, sought to bind it, to silence its ancient song. A chilling vision flickered through my mind. Elias Thorne, younger, yet with the same frantic desperation in his eyes, performing a ritual at the well, surrounded by symbols I now recognized from his journal. His hands, smeared with earth, were attempting to seal something, to contain a force that pulsed with malevolent energy. A terrifying struggle against an unseen, overwhelming power that threatened to consume him whole, leaving him forever bound to the hill's dark secrets. Elara's voice, imbued with profound sadness, continued to resonate in my thoughts. He failed. He only angered it, bound himself to its endless torment, becoming one of its echoes. It demands more now, Amelia. It demands a bridge, a living connection to the world it craves. Her gaze intensified, boring into my soul, and a terrifying realization dawned. I was that bridge. The spiral stone in my hand pulsed violently, its warmth radiating through my palm, a chilling confirmation of my unwitting role in the hill's awakening. Elara Thorne's spectral form, her ancient eyes fixed on me, pulsed with a renewed, sorrowful light. It seeks to break free entirely. Her voice echoed in my thoughts, filled with an unbearable grief. To reclaim what it believes was stolen. It needs a sustained connection, a vessel to anchor its power in the waking world, to feed its ancient hunger beyond the whispers. Her translucent hand, still hovering over the well, seemed to shimmer, as if burdened by centuries of sorrow and silent watching, trapped in the hill's eternal embrace. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The entity was not just a collection of whispers, but a sentient ancient hunger. It had been drawing on the fear and sorrow of Oakhaven for centuries, kept partially in check by Elias Thorne's failed ritual. But now it sought full release, a permanent anchor. And that anchor, that bridge was me, drawn by a connection I was, only now beginning to comprehend, a horrifying destiny. "What can I do?" I whispered aloud, my voice a frail sound in the charged clearing, the question echoing not just to Alara, but to the very essence of the hill. The spiral stone in my hand throbbed, its warmth intensifying, as if urging me to act, to understand. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and an overwhelming sense of ancient power, pressing down on me, demanding a response. Alara's form shimmered, and a new, more urgent tone entered her telepathic voice. The ancient pact. It can be renewed. A sacrifice, Amelia. Not of life, but of connection. You must sever the link, sever its access to the echoes. But beware, it will resist. Its hunger is boundless, its will formidable. Her gaze bore into me, a profound warning in her silent eyes, her spectral form subtly dissipating, becoming more translucent. Before I could ask for clarification, before I could fully grasp the chilling implications of a sacrifice of connection, Alara's form began to dissolve completely into the swirling mist, her final words echoing in my mind. The true source lies beneath the guardian stones. The ethereal glow from the well flickered and dimmed, and the pervasive whispers from the hill intensified once more. No longer guiding, but now a chaotic, angry roar, filled with a malevolent rage. Sensing my understanding, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation that awaited me deep within its ancient, hungry heart. Alara Thorne's spectral form had vanished, dissolving into the swirling mist that still rose from the well. The ethereal glow within the ancient stone flickered and dimmed, and the whispers from the hill, no longer a guiding chorus, erupted into a chaotic, angry roar, a cacophony of malevolent voices that screamed in my mind, filled with a primal rage. The air in the clearing grew heavy, thick with the overwhelming scent of decay, damp earth, and a chilling ozone tang that prickled my nostrils, signaling the presence of an immense agitated power. The cryptic instruction, the true source, lies beneath the guardian stones, echoed in my thoughts, a desperate plea from the departed spirit of Alara. I looked around the clearing, my gaze sweeping the ancient trees and the shifting fog, searching for any clue, any indication of these guardian stones. The whispers hammered at my mind, a relentless assault, a desperate attempt to drown out Alara's warning, to keep me from understanding the true nature of the hill's ancient hunger and its ultimate desire. My scientific mind, usually so precise, struggled to process the overwhelming sensory overload. The combined assault of the overwhelming sense, the oppressive pressure in the air, and the deafening chorus of whispers threatened to shatter my composure. I clutched the spiral-etched stone tightly in my hand, its warmth a small, comforting anchor in the maelstrom of fear and confusion, a direct link to the ancient energy that now surged around me. Suddenly, a massive ancient oak tree at the edge of the clearing seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. Its gnarled branches, impossibly thick and twisted, reached towards the sky like tormented limbs. At its base, half buried by centuries of earth and moss, I could discern 4 enormous, rough-hewn stones arranged in a semicircle. They were undeniably ancient, covered in the same complex faded symbols that adorn the well and Elias Thorne's journal, the guardian stones. As I took a hesitant step towards them, the ground beneath my feet vibrated with a low, resonant thrum, a sound that seemed to emanate directly from the stones themselves. The whispers from the hill, previously chaotic, now coalesced into a unified, guttural growl, a warning, a desperate roar of defiance from the entity, sensing my approach. To its most vulnerable point, the air around the guardian stones grew frigid, and the scent of decay intensified to an almost unbearable degree. A clear sign of the ancient power that lay dormant, yet awakening, beneath them. As I drew closer to the guardian stones, the ground beneath my feet grew softer, almost yielding, as if the very earth was disturbed by my presence. The air became thick with a palpable dread, and the rhythmic growl from the hill intensified, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate directly from the ancient stones themselves. It was a sound of immense power, of ancient displeasure, a clear warning against disturbing what lay beneath, a desperate attempt to drive me away. My gaze fell upon the central point of the semicircle of stones, a patch of bare, dark earth that seemed to pulse faintly with an inner light, as if something was stirring just beneath the surface. This was Elias Thorne's true source, the heart of the hill's ancient power. The spiral stone in my hand throbbed violently, its warmth now almost scalding, guiding my eyes, urging me to approach, to fulfill the grim destiny that Alara Thorne had revealed. Suddenly, from the darkness just beyond the guardian stones, a new figure began to emerge. Not the indistinct shadow from the graveyard, but something more tangible, more horrifyingly defined. It was a colossal entity, gaunt and impossibly tall, its form shifting, composed of swirling shadows and raw, exposed sinew that seemed to writhe and undulate with a sickening life of its own. Its limbs were elongated, disproportionate, and its head was a vague, formless mass. But I felt its eyes, an unseen, burning gaze that pierced directly into my soul. This was the entity, the very source of the whispers, now fully manifested, its ancient hunger made terrifyingly real. A guttural roar, not of sound but of pure psychic force, erupted from its formless head, a terrifying burst of ancient rage that slammed into my mind, threatening to shatter my sanity. The whispers from the hill, which had been a chorus, now converged into a singular, deafening scream, a chaotic symphony of agony and fury that was both alien and intimately familiar. The entity lumbered towards me, its movements slow and deliberate, each step accompanied by a sickening squelch as its form pressed against the damp earth. The scent of decay, metallic and cloying, intensified to an unbearable degree, and the air around it grew frigid, radiating a coldness that seemed to drain the very warmth from my body, threatening to freeze me in place. Its elongated, shadowy arms, tipped with what looked like razor-sharp talons, began to reach for me, its intent undeniably to consume me, to drag me into the primal darkness from which it had been unleashed. The immense entity, a living manifestation of the hill's ancient hunger, continued its slow, deliberate advance, its elongated, shadowy arms reaching for me. The air around it vibrated with a raw, malevolent power, and the scent of decay was now overwhelming, making me gag. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the damp earth, paralyzed by the sheer terror of its unholy presence, the gravity of the impending confrontation. A single dominant whisper, sharp and chilling, pierced through the chaotic roar of the hill, echoing directly in my mind. Elara binds us. It was the entity's voice, raw and filled with ancient fury, acknowledging the spectral presence that had spoken to me. It revealed that Elara Thorne, even in her spectral form, was still a barrier, a lingering resistance to its full liberation, a connection to the ancient pact that still held it partially in check. I clutched the spiral-etched stone in my hand, its warmth now a searing heat against my palm, a direct conduit to the entity's power. It felt like a part of me, pulsing with its own life, offering a strange comfort amidst the terror. I realized then that the sacrifice of connection Elara had spoken of wasn't about severing my link to the whispers, but about severing the entity's enduring link to the ancient pact, to Elara herself, the last vestiges of its binding. The entity let out another psychic roar, a wave of pure, unfiltered rage that slammed into my mind, threatening to crush my will. It was attempting to overwhelm me, to break my resolve before I could understand its weakness. The ground beneath my feet trembled violently, and the ancient oak tree at the edge of the clearing groaned, its gnarled branches shaking as if in protest, resisting the entity's destructive power. Driven by a sudden, desperate surge of clarity, I raised the spiral stone, holding it aloft towards the approaching entity. The stone pulsed with an intense, blinding light, its warmth now an agonizing burn in my hand, radiating a power that seemed to push back against the entity's oppressive aura. The whispers from the hill, which had been a unified roar, fractured into a cacophony of shrieks and moans, as if the entity itself was in immense pain, recoiling from the ancient energy contained within the stone. The entity recoiled, a horrifying, guttural shriek tearing through the air, a sound not of agony but of ancient, frustrated rage. The blinding light from the spiral stone seemed to burn its shadowy form, causing it to writhe and contort, its elongated limbs flailing wildly. The whispers from the hill, a unified scream just moments before, fragmented into a cacophony of terrified whimpers, as if the very essence of the hill was in distress, its power momentarily subdued by the ancient artifact. I pressed forward, ignoring the searing pain in my hand, my gaze fixed on the creature. The ground beneath me trembled violently, and cracks began to spiderweb across the surface of the guardian stones, a clear sign of the immense pressure being exerted on the ancient bindings. The air was thick with the overwhelming scent of ozone, and something akin to burnt shadow, a putrid aroma that caught in my throat, but my resolve hardened, knowing this was the moment of truth. The entity, desperate and weakened, lashed out with a shadowy tendril, a whip of pure malevolence that struck the ancient oak tree beside the guardian stones. The massive tree groaned, its bark splitting, and a shower of leaves, dry and brittle, rained down around me, a fleeting image of its impending demise. This was its last, desperate attempt to break free, to destroy the very foundations that held it in check before the connection could be severed. With a final desperate surge of will, I thrust the now blazing spiral stone directly towards the central patch of dark earth at the base of the guardian stones. The light intensified, becoming a blinding beacon that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. A tremendous crack echoed through the clearing, as if the earth itself was splitting apart, and the ground around the stones erupted, sending geysers of ancient, dark earth and splintered rock into the air. From the newly formed chasm, a deafening, unholy roar erupted, a sound of unimaginable agony and ancient power being forcefully ripped apart. The shadowy entity shrieked, its form dissolving rapidly into swirling tendrils of black smoke that were violently sucked back into the gaping maw in the earth. The light from the spiral stone pulsed one final time, then dimmed, and a profound, chilling silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by the distant, mournful wail of the wind. I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that the connection had been severed, but at what terrible cost, and what had truly been unleashed beneath the guardian stones. A profound, chilling silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by the distant, mournful wail of the wind through the ancient trees. The oppressive roar of the entity, the cacophony of the hill's whispers, all had ceased, replaced by an unsettling void. The air, once thick with decay and malevolence, now carried a faint, almost ethereal scent of rain-washed earth, and something undefinable, something that spoke of ancient peace, albeit a precarious one. My hand, still clutching the spiral stone, a mere dull rock now, throbbed with a residual ache, a physical echo of the immense power that had just surged through it. I stood amidst the broken earth and splintered rock surrounding the guardian, stones, the remnants of the entity's final desperate struggle. The massive oak tree, struck by its shadowy tendril, stood scarred and bleeding sap, a silent witness to the battle that had just transpired. The newly formed chasm, where the entity had been violently sucked back into the earth, was a jagged maw of darkness, hinting at the unfathomable depths from which it had emerged, now quiet, but undeniably present. My knees buckled, and I sank to the damp earth, the adrenaline draining from my body, leaving me utterly exhausted. My mind, though no longer assaulted by the entity's psychic roars and the hill's overwhelming whispers, still reeled from the sheer terror and the incomprehensible reality of what I had just witnessed. I had confronted an ancient, malevolent force, and somehow, against all odds, I had survived, severing its direct connection to the world above. But Alara Thorne's final words echoed in my mind. A sacrifice, Amelia, not of life, but of connection. You must sever the link, sever its access to the echoes. And then her warning, it will resist. Its hunger is boundless, its will formidable. I had driven the entity back, but had I truly severed its access to the echoes, or merely forced it into a temporary dormancy, a slumber from which it would inevitably rise again, perhaps even stronger, more enraged? As I stared at the dark, maw in the earth, a profound sense of unease settled upon me. The silence, though welcome after the terrifying chaos, felt fragile, almost watchful. It was the silence of a predator momentarily thwarted, not defeated. The hill, once a source of terrifying whispers, now felt like a vast ancient being holding its breath, its presence still palpable, a lingering awareness that the battle was far from over, and that a final, true choice still lay before me. The silence stretched. An unsettling thought began to crystallize in my mind. What had I actually done? Had I truly severed the link, as Alara had instructed, or had I merely wounded it, sending it back into a temporary, yet more dangerous slumber? The sacrifice of connection felt incomplete, a partial victory that left a chilling void where, the definitive ending should have been. The faint, almost imperceptible hum of the hill's presence lingered, a constant reminder of its ancient, enduring power, now muted, but not extinguished. I pulled out Elias Thorne's journal, its pages now feeling cold and heavy in my hand, and flipped to the final frantic entries. His crude drawings of the guardian stones now seemed to depict not only their function as a binding, but also an intricate network of what looked like roots, connecting them to a central point beneath the earth, a web designed to suppress something immense. His final words spoke of the great sleep and the hunger's return, implying a cyclical nature to the hill's malevolence. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the depths of the chasm, followed by a faint metallic clink. My heart leaped into my throat. It was a sound that spoke of something stirring, something shifting within the dark earth below, dispelling any illusion of total victory. The scent of damp earth and an underlying metallic tang, now more subtle but undeniably present, seemed to waft from the abyss, a chilling reminder that the entity, though subdued, was still there, a living, breathing presence beneath Oakhaven. My gaze fell upon a single gnarled root, thicker than my arm, that snaked out from beneath one of the guardian stones, stretching towards the edge of the chasm. It seemed unnaturally dark, almost black, and pulsed faintly with a dull, internal light, unlike any living root I had ever seen. It was a direct physical connection, a literal link from the guardian stones to the entity below, a tangible representation of the sacrifice of connection Alara had spoken of, a path to severing its ultimate access. A new whisper, clear and resonant, brushed against my mind, devoid of the previous malevolence, but filled with a profound sorrow. It was Alara's voice again, weaker now, but distinct. The root, Amelia, the final bond. Cut it, and the hunger will sleep. Forever. The implication was clear. This was the ultimate choice, the true sacrifice. But what would be the consequence of severing such an ancient, primordial link? And what would happen to me, to the town, if I chose to undertake this final, irreversible act? Alara's spectral voice, weak but resolute, echoed the final instruction in my mind. Cut it, and the hunger will sleep. Forever. The it was clearly the gnarled, dark root, pulsing with that faint internal light, the last physical link to the ancient entity below. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, a monumental choice that would determine not only my own fate, but the future of Oakhaven, perhaps for centuries to come. I looked at the spiral stone in my hand, its warmth now a comforting presence, a silent testament to the power it had wielded and the ancient knowledge it contained. It felt like an extension of my will, a tool for this final desperate act. The surrounding air, though quiet, hummed with a profound tension, as if the hill itself was holding its breath, awaiting my decision, a silent observer in this ancient drama. My gaze flickered between the dark root and the gaping chasm from which the entity had emerged. If I severed the root, would it truly end the hunger, or would it merely cut off the only remaining connection, leaving an enraged, unbound power dormant beneath the town, perhaps to rise again in an even more catastrophic form? The choice was agonizing, fraught with unknown consequences, a gamble with the very soul of Oakhaven. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from deeper within the chasm, and a faint, acrid scent, like burnt earth, wafted up from the abyss. It was a subtle sign, but enough to remind me that the entity, though subdued, was still a living, breathing malevolence, contained but not truly defeated. Alara's warning returned. It will resist. Its hunger is boundless, its will formidable. This was its enduring power, its resilience even in retreat. My decision solidified. To leave the root intact was to leave Oakhaven perpetually vulnerable, to allow the ancient hunger to linger, a ticking time bomb beneath the quiet town. The Akainet sacrifice of connection was the only path to true peace, a chance to finally silence the whispers and bind the hunger forever. With a deep breath stealing my resolve, I reached for the spiral stone, its familiar weight a promise of ancient power, preparing for the final, irreversible act that would define Oakhaven's destiny. With the spiral stone now glowing faintly in my grip, its surface strangely cold despite the warmth it had radiated moments before, I approached the gnarled, pulsing root that snaked from beneath the guardian stones. It was thicker than my wrist, dark as tar, and vibrated with a subtle, unsettling energy that seemed to hum beneath my skin. The air around it grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something acrid, almost like ozone, signaling the raw power it contained. I raised the spiral stone, its ancient etchings seeming to glow with an inner light, as if preparing for its grim purpose. The whispers from the hill, which had been silent since Alara's instruction, now returned, not as a roar of rage, but as a low, mournful moan, a collective lament that filled the clearing. It was the sound of ancient sorrow, of a deep, primal fear, as if the hill itself knew what I was about to do, and mourned the severing of this ancient, vital connection. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from the immense weight of the choice. To cut this root was to gamble with the unknown, to irrevocably alter the very fabric of Oakhaven's existence. But to leave it was to condemn the town to a perpetual threat, an ancient hunger that would one day rise again. The scent of rain-washed earth filled my lungs, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the hill's sorrow, grounding me in the immediate reality of my decision. With a final, resolute breath, I brought the glowing spiral stone down against the root. There was no resistance, no struggle. The stone, with an almost supernatural precision, sliced through the gnarled root as if it were butter. A blinding flash of purple light erupted from the point of severance, followed by a sound that was not a scream, but a profound, shuddering sigh, as if a colossal, ancient being had just released its last breath. A sound that seemed to reverberate through the very core of the earth. The light faded, leaving the root cleanly severed, its ends glowing faintly for a moment before dimming to black. A profound, aching silence fell upon the clearing, deeper and more absolute than any silence I had ever known. The whispers from the hill were gone, utterly, completely vanished, leaving only the distant, mournful wail of the wind. I stood there, the spiral stone now cold and lifeless in my hand, a chilling realization dawning upon me. I had severed the connection. I had silenced the whispers. But at what cost had Oakhaven's ancient burden finally been laid to rest? The answer, I knew, would unfold with the coming dawn, revealing the true face of the town's liberation. The silence that fell upon the clearing was absolute, a profound void where the whispers had once been, a quietness so deep it felt almost deafening. The air, now stripped of its oppressive malevolence, carried only the crisp, clean scent of rain-washed earth and pine, a stark contrast to the decay that had permeated it moments before. The severed root, black and lifeless, lay at the base of the guardian stones, a chilling testament to the irreversible act I had just performed. My hand, still clutching the now inert spiral stone, felt cold and strangely empty, the power it once held utterly gone. I remained on my knees, my body aching with exhaustion, staring at the segment of root, then at the still gaping maw in the earth. The chasm remained dark, silent, offering no hint of the ancient entity it once held, no echo of its rage or hunger. The profound quiet felt both a blessing and a terrifying unknown. I had silenced the whispers, but what new equilibrium had I forced upon this ancient hill? And what, if anything, remained within its depths? The first rays of dawn began to pierce through the lingering fog, painting the clearing in hues of soft gray and pale gold. The spectral twilight that had enveloped the hill seemed to lift, revealing the familiar, yet subtly altered landscape of Oakhaven. The ancient oak, though scarred, still stood proudly, its gnarled branches reaching towards the emerging light, a silent witness to the profound change that had just occurred. Driven by a lingering unease, I rose, my muscles protesting, and walked to the edge of the chasm. I peered into its depths, a profound darkness that seemed to swallow the nascent light of dawn. There was no movement, no sound, no discernible presence. It was merely a hole in the earth, a scar on the ancient land. Yet I felt an undeniable shift in the atmosphere, a sense of something profound having been laid to rest, or perhaps simply put into a deeper, colder slumber. As I turned from the chasm, my gaze fell upon the guardian stones. The cracks that had spiderwebbed across their surfaces during the entity's struggle were now gone, as if the stones themselves had healed. They stood solid, stoic, their ancient symbols glowing faintly in the soft morning light, imbued with a renewed power, no longer merely bindings, but silent sentinels of a peace I had fought to achieve, a profound silence I had bought at an unknown cost. As I began my descent from the clearing, a strange quiet enveloped the entire hill. The wind, which had always whispered or wailed, now moved through the trees in a soft, gentle rustle, almost a sigh of relief. The air felt lighter, clearer, as if a profound burden had been lifted from the very landscape. The scent of pine and damp earth was now pure, untainted by the metallic tang or the cloying decay that had permeated the air for days, a tangible shift that spoke volumes of the entity's absence. The path that had seemed treacherous and menacing just hours before now felt familiar, almost welcoming. The twisted roots no longer seemed to grasp, and the ancient trees, though still gnarled, no longer felt ominous. It was as if the hill itself had exhaled, settling back into a peaceful slumber, its ancient burden finally laid to rest. I felt a deep weariness in my bones, but it was a satisfying fatigue, born of effort and a profound sense of accomplishment. As I neared the lower slopes, the fog began to dissipate entirely, revealing Oakhaven bathed in the gentle light of the rising sun. The village below looked peaceful, almost pristine, its chimneys sending lazy curls of smoke into the crisp morning air. There was no sign of the storm's fury, no indication of the terror that had consumed my night. It was as if the hill had absorbed all the chaos, holding it within its ancient heart, leaving the town untouched. Reaching the edge of the Thorne family graveyard, I paused. The newly dug grave was still there, the raw earth a stark contrast to the weathered stone. But the tattered piece of dark wool was gone, vanished without a trace. It was as if the silent messenger, his purpose served, had finally found his own rest, or perhaps had simply returned to the ethereal realm from which he briefly emerged. The whispers, even here, were completely absent, replaced by a profound, unwavering silence. I walked back towards my cottage, the quiet of the morning settling deeply into my soul. The splintered hole in my living room floor, where the skeletal hand had emerged, was still a gaping maw, a physical reminder of the night's horrors, but the cold dread that had once emanated from it was gone, replaced by a faint, almost ethereal coolness, as if the connection, though severed, had left a lingering imprint, a permanent scar on the fabric of my home, a tangible testament to the unnamable force I had confronted. Inside my cottage, the quiet was profound, a stark contrast to the days filled with the terrifying whispers and the pervasive sense of dread. The air, though no longer charged with malevolence, carried a faint, lingering scent of damp earth and something indefinable, something ancient that seemed to have been a part of the house for centuries. I knew then that while the entity was gone, its presence had left an indelible mark on my home, a subtle alteration in its very essence, a constant reminder of the profound events. I looked at the Elias Thorne journal, still resting on my workshop table. Its cover, once vibrant with sinister energy, now seemed dull, its spiral etching flat and lifeless, merely an old carving on an ancient book. The power it had channeled, the ancient knowledge it had revealed, was no longer active, a testament to the severing of the connection. It was just a book now, a relic of a horrifying past, its purpose fulfilled, its secrets laid bare, a silent witness to Oakhaven's true history. As I began to clean the scattered debris around the hole in the floor, sweeping away the splintered wood and dust, I noticed something glinting amidst the wreckage. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, almost completely obscured by the debris. It was intricately carved with the same spiral design that adorned the journal and the guardian stones, a hidden detail I had never seen before. It felt cold to the touch, and ancient, radiating a faint, almost imperceptible hum of residual energy. Opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled beneath a delicate faded glass, was a miniature portrait of a woman. Her eyes, though painted with faded colors, held a profound sorrow, a gentle weariness that seemed to pierce through the centuries. It was Elias Thorne, undeniably. But beneath her image, etched onto the silver, was a single chilling word in elegant, archaic script. Remember. It was a message, not a warning. A plea from the spectral guide who had vanished. The locket felt heavy in my hand, a tangible link to the past, a silent reminder of the sacrifice and the choice. Ilara's voice, though no longer echoing in my mind, resonated in the quiet of the cottage, a final instruction to carry her memory, to ensure Oakhaven never forgot the ancient hunger that slept beneath its surface. The peace I had brought was fragile, built on a foundation of forgotten history and a profound sacrifice, and it was my responsibility to keep it. I closed the locket, its weight a comforting, yet sobering presence in my hand. The etched word, remember, echoed a responsibility, a silent vow to Elias Thorne that her sacrifice and Elias's desperate attempts would not be in vain. I knew that Oakhaven's peace was now my burden, a fragile tranquility built upon ancient secrets and a terrifying confrontation. The hill, now truly silent, felt like a watchful, sleeping giant, its power dormant, but never truly gone, its memory entrusted to me. I spent the next few days working tirelessly, first patching the gaping hole in my floorboards, then tending to to the scarred oak tree in the clearing. Each nail hammered, each splinter removed, felt like a small act of healing, a physical manifestation of the profound shift that had occurred. The silence of the hill was a constant companion now, no longer terrifying, but a deep, resonant calm that permeated every aspect of my life. A profound quiet I had never thought possible. Mrs. Gable visited a few days later, her eyes still holding, a lingering wariness, but her demeanor noticeably lighter. "The air feels different, Amelia," she mused, gazing out towards the hill from my porch, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "A peace has settled over Oak Haven. Whatever was stirring, it seems to have quieted." I merely nodded, a silent acknowledgement, knowing that some truths were too profound, too terrifying, for simple words, especially for those who hadn't walked the path I had. My life in Oak Haven returned to its rhythm, but it was a new rhythm, one underscored by a profound, unwavering silence. I continued my work, restoring forgotten books. But now, each tome felt like a connection to a deeper history, a reminder of the unseen forces that shaped our world. The hill stood as it always had, majestic and silent, a testament to its ancient power, but its whispers were gone, replaced by a profound, unbroken peace that only I, perhaps, truly understood. As the years passed, the scar on my knee from the fall in the graveyard served as a faded mark of my terrifying journey. The locket, with Alara Thorne's portrait and the etched word "Remember," remained my closest secret, a tangible link to the profound sacrifice and the broken silence that had brought peace to Oak Haven. The hill would sleep, its hunger dormant, its whispers finally stilled, but the memory of its awakening and the cost of its slumber would live on, forever etched into the heart of its last listener. Where mists once danced and voices rose, from ancient depths, where dread still grows, now falls a silence, deep and stark, upon a pact renewed in the dark. Amelia, weaver of lore and time, heard the hills call, a chilling rhyme, from ancient mound, its hollowed core, that sanity strained and asked for more. Elias Thorne, a ghost of the past, guided her steps, a shadow cast, to where the well with light did pulse, where Alara, the first, held ancient impulse. The skeletal hand, a fleeting fright, revealed the chasm consuming light. Midst guardian stones, the earth upturned, the ancient hunger finally interned. The root was severed, a bond undone, for fragile peace, a victory won. The hill now breathes, its slumber deep, yet the cost of quiet, a secret to keep. Within the Sawan locket, a gaze, remember, etched, of one who fell, a promise stretched. Amelia, keeper of what's now laid to rest, lives the silence she forged, put to the test. The voices hushed, the echoes ceased, but the hill's true tale forever leased. In Oak Haven, calm, a veil on pain, and her heart its guardian, through sun and rain,